Hi there from Toronto. I'm here actually at Sidewalk Labs. Pan up a little bit. Headquarters here, right on the waterfront. Let me see if I can pan around a little bit. We're in the middle of an area that's pretty undeveloped, as you can kind of tell. There's a big old grain silo. We're right on the shores of Lake Ontario. And I'm here because Sidewalk Labs is hoping to build essentially a very large neighborhood, about 100,000 people, from scratch, and figure out how you would do that and make quality of life much, much better at the same time. So we've taken this place, which is actually an old fish processing warehouse, and we've built it out with some of the ideas that we have for a city of the future. So follow me. Let's see if I can walk and talk at the same time, and I'll show you some of these ideas. For example, we've just installed what we're calling a building raincoat. So imagine if a building was able, when it started raining or snowing or was super windy, was able to deploy a pretty significant raincoat, kind of like an awning in the front of a store, but more significant. You see the pile of snow here. We're definitely in the middle of winter here. But here's the building raincoat, for example. You can kind of see it's covered in this plastic called ETFE, and this would extend, again, this is a tiny sample, this would extend automatically when the weather got bad to make walking underneath it actually pleasant and sitting out here. Let's see if we can kind of demonstrate. Here I'm under the building raincoat, and I've got some comfy chairs, and I have a seat, and because we're protected by this amazing raincoat, I'm comfortable, even in Toronto. But then out here, if we look outside the building raincoat, again, all this is kind of small-scale experiments. You can see a patio, or kind of part of a roadway, really, with hexagonal pavers. And these hexagonal pavers do a few things. You can see some of them actually light up. It might be difficult to see in the video, but these light up, and in fact, some of them are heated. So if it was snowing today, you would notice that a lot of the snow was actually melting, because a lot of these pavers are heated. And that's one of our ideas for keeping, say, the walkways, the sidewalks, the streets, bikeways, and so on, snow-free, even when it's bad weather here in Toronto and anywhere else where there's a lot of snowfall. At the moment, you know, there's lots of salt that goes on roads and sidewalks. That eventually washes off into Lake Ontario, and that's not great from an environmental point of view. And it's also dangerous when things are icy. And furthermore, if you're in a wheelchair, snow, especially in the gutters and up against the curb, makes it really, really difficult to get around. So we're now going to go inside our office here at 307. Let's see if we can find my card. Okay. And so here we are inside 307. Car in the background. And essentially inside here we've got a number of other experiments. The kinds of technology we think might make the city of the future much more affordable, much easier to get around, much more sustainable. And here's an example of something we're investigating called generative design. So imagine that you could have a computer generate all kinds of different city layouts and automatically evaluate them in terms of how well they support sustainability and mobility, affordable buildings, and so on. And so essentially what I have here are a bunch of knobs, and some of them say, for example, green space, some of them say height variation and building shape. And so let me see if I can get this all in. When I move one of these knobs, you can see that the city actually moves. You know, these buildings look way too tall, so I'm going to actually reduce the density. And as I do that, if you can see me over here reducing the density, I actually get much more interesting layouts. And let's have a bit more height variation. You can't see some of the parks here. Then we need much more green space. There you go, that's looking better. I want some more green space. Now I've got a circular layout in terms of the actual street grid. Let me try something a bit more random, see how that looks. That's not bad. And then I can turn, see over here, I've got a button that says analysis. And so if I turn analysis on, now all the buildings are colored according to how sustainable they are. For example, you can see over here energy efficiency and views and outdoor comfort, visual interest. And so I can experiment with turning some of these knobs again and see if I can actually improve on some of the some of the comfort aspects or the views and so on. So anyway, that's a technology that's kind of in its infancy right now, but we're pretty excited about. Another technology we're looking at is something called digital electricity. So let's see. I hope I'm not making you nauseous. But the idea is that instead of piping 240 volts everywhere or 110 volts here in Canada, using DC, digital electricity or direct current, because actually most of the devices that we use now don't really want 110 volts. They want 5 volts or 12 volts. Think about your cell phone or a laptop or a lot of equipment these days. So it's a little bit hard to see in here, but we're actually transmitting this digital electricity through this rack-mounted server. But it's not a data server, it's an electricity server. And in fact, what it's transmitting to, among other things, are these fans up here. Let's see if we can get it. So these fans are actually running off digital electricity. We can monitor exactly how much energy they're taking, and the wires that go up there are actually super thin, and they don't have to be run by an electrician. So there's lots of savings, not just from a sustainability point of view, but from a construction point of view, which, you know, if you can make things more cheaply, you can make housing more affordable, and that's good for everybody. The other thing that I'll show you here is, let's see, is that it's sort of a prototype of a city of a street of the future. So we had those lights outside, but here's sort of an indoor experiment with the same kinds of things. We've actually set up for an event tomorrow, so that's why there's tables in the middle of the street. But actually that sort of demonstrates an interesting point, that we now treat streets like they're just for cars, but why should they be just for cars? If you imagine you have, and I'm just going to change the street layout a little bit. If you imagine you have a city full of autonomous vehicles, so you don't have humans driving all the cars, you actually have autonomous vehicles that are driving themselves. That has a few implications. So one of them is that there's no reason a car has to sit around in a parking spot all day, right? It should be out driving around, picking other people up and dropping them off. This is the idea that people would own fuel cars or maybe zero cars, and they would take advantage of this fleet of vehicles to pick them up and drop them off whenever they needed. So because the streets don't need a lot of parking spaces, we can regain that space and actually use a lot of that for public realm, essentially parks and plazas and so on. And furthermore, if we trust self-driving vehicles, which I think this will be a reasonable thing to do, trust them not to drive up by mistake on the sidewalk, on the footpath, which is partly what curbs stop cars from doing, we can actually get rid of a lot of the curbs. We need other ways of channeling water, and we've got ideas around that. Then you can start saying, well, here's a street, it's all flat, and it's not clear exactly where the curb is from a physical point of view and where the sidewalk is versus the road where cars are driving. And in fact, we could use lights to indicate what's what. So this is set up, for example, for pick up and drop off for kids. It's hard to see here, but these lights are actually blue, and they say there's a child as they're getting out of school, pick up drop off zone. And if I change this, I can, for example, make the whole thing a pedestrian plaza, where white means pedestrians only. So this street is now closed to regular traffic, and I did that with a bit of software that basically changed the lights in the street, but also told all the autonomous vehicles what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So right now, no autonomous vehicles allowed, and obviously there are no autonomous vehicles trying to run me down right now, but we've actually got a bunch of these simulated, and so in a different experience, which I might try and show you later on, we've got the idea of autonomous vehicles actually simulated and stopping for people in the middle of the street. I'm now going to make a street with a bike lane. So now, again, a little bit difficult to see in the video, but a lot of this is green in the middle, which is actually part of a bike lane. So the street itself becomes a bit of software. What I was going to show you while we're here, let me just pan around. You can get an idea of the space. This is a space that we actually bring members of the public into to actually experience some of the ideas that we propose to build in a new city. And actually, right now, I've just stepped into a mock-up of an apartment. And here I am stepping into the bedroom. You see the bed down there. This is just made out of cardboard right now. But we're actually running a lot of the appliances in here off digital electricity. This is one of my favorites. This is from LG in Korea, and actually is a wardrobe, but it's a wardrobe that has essentially a steamer in it. So you have some clothing that you've worn all day. Doesn't totally need to go in the wash, but it's maybe a little crinkled and not totally fresh. You put this in here overnight, and it steams it overnight and freshens it up and takes all the wrinkles out without you having to do anything. Again, powered by this digital electricity. So we've got lots of ideas to make, again, living a little bit nicer, a little bit easier, certainly cheaper. We've been thinking about all kinds of other things. So, here's an exhibit, for example, on accessibility. How would you make the city of the future much more accessible to people in wheelchairs or on crutches, or who maybe can't see or can't hear? We're thinking about how you would actually study how life is lived in parks, and how would you improve parks on that basis. And then, if we go over on the corner here, heading towards some of our ideas around reusability, making things more sustainable, robotic sorting of trash, for example, of rubbish, so we can actually recycle a lot more, and also reduce the amount of energy we use to make this place climate positive. Thinking about how we deal with all the data, and if we have to collect data to achieve some of these things, how we do it responsibly, how we can motivate it in the right way. So anyway, that's just a little idea, and you can see there's a street right outside here, a little bit of an idea of the kinds of things that we're thinking about here in Toronto. So I'm glad to be able to share a few of our ideas with you. Here's the map, here's some of the buildings, and I look forward to fielding some of your questions.